The weathered photograph slipped from between the pages of my old diary. A smiling young woman with hopeful eyes, standing proudly in front of her first investment property. That woman was me, Eleanor Wright, 43 years ago. I picked up the faded image and smiled wistfully. The real estate empire I'd quietly built over the decades would shock most people, especially my daughter Catherine, who had just relegated me to the dusty attic of her home for the holidays. The same daughter who'd been complaining about her mortgage payments over dinner, unaware that her mother was sitting on a $20 million fortune. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins on a crisp December morning, 3 weeks before Christmas. I'd just sold my modest suburban home in Oak Ridge, not because I needed the money, but because maintaining a 3-bedroom house at 72 had become cumbersome. The plan was to find a comfortable condo downtown, something with a doorman and elevator access. I had more than enough funds. I simply wanted to downsize. My late husband Thomas had been the financial advisor everyone in town consulted, while I was the quiet English teacher at the local high school. What nobody knew, not even Thomas initially, was that I'd inherited a small sum from my grandmother at 25 and immediately invested in real estate. While Thomas had managed other people's money with conservative wisdom, I'd been silently acquiring undervalued properties across 3 states, renovating them, and either selling at profit or maintaining them as rentals. My portfolio had grown steadily, quietly, all these decades. Thomas had been impressed when he discovered my side business 10 years into our marriage, and we'd agreed to keep it separate from our regular finances. "That's your legacy, Ellie," he'd said, "something that's entirely yours." After his passing, 5 years ago, I'd continued living modestly, never flashing wealth or changing my lifestyle. My property management company handled the day-to-day operations, and the income flowed into separate accounts that nobody, not even my daughter, knew existed. Catherine had been calling more frequently since I mentioned selling the house. She lived in Westbrook, about 2 hours away, with her husband Derek and their 2 teenagers, Amber and Jacob. My son-in-law worked in finance, not very successfully from what I gathered, and Catherine ran a small interior design business that catered to wealthy clients but somehow never seemed to turn much profit. "Mom, where will you go for Christmas now that you've sold the house?" Catherine had asked during our weekly call, her voice carrying that familiar note of concern that always preceded an uncomfortable suggestion. "I've already booked a lovely suite at the Granville Hotel downtown," I'd replied. "They do a wonderful holiday package." The silence on the other end lasted a beat too long. "You're going to spend Christmas alone in a hotel? That's so depressing." "I'll hardly be alone. The Granville has a full schedule of holiday events for guests, and several of my friends from the book club will be there too," I explained, though I knew Catherine wasn't really listening. "Absolutely not," she'd declared with finality. "You're coming to stay with us." I won't take no for an answer. I hesitated. Catherine's invitations always came with invisible strings attached. But I also knew that refusing would lead to weeks of guilt-tripping and concerned calls to my friends about Mother's stubborn independence. Sometimes choosing the path of least resistance was the wisest option. "That's very kind, dear. Just for Christmas week, then?" Catherine's voice immediately brightened. "Actually, I was thinking you should come mid-December and stay through New Year's. The kids would love having Grandma around for the whole holiday season." That was how I found myself packing for a 3-week stay at Catherine's house, canceling my hotel reservation and wondering what my daughter really wanted this time. The pattern was familiar. The effusive invitation, followed inevitably by requests for financial help. Last time, it had been Jacob's private school tuition that they were temporarily struggling with. Before that, it was the roof repair that their insurance unfairly wouldn't cover. I never minded helping with the grandchildren's education or true emergencies, but I'd grown weary of being treated like Catherine's personal bank, while simultaneously being lectured about my spending habits and investment choices. The irony was almost laughable. My financially struggling daughter giving advice to her secretly wealthy mother. The train ride to Westbrook gave me time to reflect. I'd never been flashy with money, a value instilled by my Depression-era parents. Wealth whispers, my father used to say. Even after amassing millions, I still clipped coupons, drove a 5-year-old sedan, and thought twice before ordering the most expensive item on a menu. Not from necessity, but from ingrained habit. Thomas had been the same way, which was perhaps why we'd worked so well together. Our daughter, however, had developed different values. Catherine had always been drawn to status symbols and external validation. As a teenager, she'd been embarrassed by our modest home and my discount store clothes. In college, she'd taken out additional loans to finance a lifestyle that matched her wealthier friends, despite our offers to cover her essential expenses. And now, as an adult, she lived in a house too large for her family's needs, in an exclusive neighborhood they couldn't comfortably afford. I often wondered where we'd gone wrong in raising her. Had our frugality backfired, creating a child who equated worth with material possessions? Or was it simply her nature to want more than she had? These questions had haunted me for years, with no satisfactory answers. When the train pulled into Westbrook Station, I spotted Derek waiting by his luxury SUV, checking his watch impatiently. He plastered on a smile when he saw me. "Eleanor, welcome, welcome. Here, let me take your bags." His greeting was warm, but his eyes kept darting to his phone. Catherine's finishing up with a client. Big fish. Could mean a significant contract. For her business. "How wonderful," I said, settling into the passenger seat. "And how are things at your firm?" Derek's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Challenging market right now. Everyone's feeling the squeeze, but I'm working on some promising leads." The same answer he'd given for the past 2 years. As we drove through the beautifully decorated streets of Westbrook Heights, Derek filled the silence with careful questions about my house sale. How much had I gotten for it? Was I working with a financial advisor for the proceeds? Had I considered investment opportunities? I answered vaguely, knowing full well what he was fishing for. When we pulled into their circular driveway, Catherine burst through the front door, designer boots clicking against the pavement as she rushed to embrace me. "Mom! Finally! We've been preparing for days," she exclaimed, looking polished in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than a month of my former teacher's salary. "The kids are so excited you're staying through the holidays." The grandchildren appeared on cue, though excited wouldn't have been my chosen descriptor for their expressions. 16-year-old Amber managed a distracted, "Hey, Grandma," before returning to her phone, while 14-year-old Jacob offered a quick hug that felt rehearsed. "We've set up the most perfect space for you," Catherine announced, ushering me into the house. "You're going to love it." I should have recognized the warning signs, the overly enthusiastic tone, the exchanged glances between Catherine and Derek, the way they seemed to be bracing for my reaction. But I was tired from the journey and allowed myself to be led through their immaculate home, admiring the elaborate Christmas decorations that adorned every surface. "The main guest room is being renovated," Catherine explained as we bypassed the second floor entirely and continued up a narrower staircase. Such unfortunate timing, but the contractor insisted it had to be done now. The third floor. They were taking me to the third floor. My arthritic knee protested each step, but I maintained a neutral expression. "Here we are." Catherine pushed open a door with a flourish, revealing what could only be described as a converted attic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The space had been hastily arranged with a twin bed, a small dresser, and a nightstand. A dusty, artificial Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with mismatched ornaments that had clearly been relegated from the main displays downstairs. The slanted ceiling meant I could stand upright only in the center of the room. A tiny window overlooked the backyard, offering a view of their empty swimming pool covered for winter. "We've made it so cozy," Catherine said, patting the quilt on the bed. "And you'll have complete privacy up here. No one will disturb you." "Or hear you call for help if you fall," I thought wryly, noticing the steep stairs I'd need to navigate multiple times daily. "The bathroom is just down the hall," Derek added, pointing to a door barely visible in the shadows. What he didn't mention was that down the hall meant a bathroom that clearly hadn't been updated since the house was built in the 1970s, with a temperamental shower and peeling wallpaper. "It's charming," I managed, setting my suitcase down. "Thank you for accommodating me." Catherine beamed, either missing or ignoring the reservation in my voice. "Dinner's at 7. The Hendersons are joining us. You remember Craig, Derek's boss? His wife Belinda is a potential client for me, so it's a bit of a business dinner. You don't mind, do you?" Before I could answer, she was already heading downstairs, calling back, "Rest up, Mom. Big night ahead." Left alone in the dusty attic, I sat on the edge of the creaking twin bed and laughed softly to myself. My daughter, who lived in a 5-bedroom house with an actual guest suite on the second floor, which I strongly suspected was not under renovation at all, had relegated her supposedly cash-strapped elderly mother to the attic, while simultaneously organizing a business dinner to impress potential clients and employers. If she had any idea that I could purchase this entire neighborhood without blinking an eye, she might have reconsidered her sleeping arrangements. But as I unpacked my sensible, middle-class clothes and arranged my drugstore cosmetics on the wobbly dresser, I reminded myself that wealth had afforded me one luxury more valuable than any material possession: the ability to see people's true character when they thought you had nothing to offer them. Dinner that evening was exactly as I'd expected, an elaborate performance of wealth and success that I knew my daughter and son-in-law couldn't afford. The dining room sparkled with expensive china, crystal glasses, and silver candlesticks that I recognized as recent purchases. Catherine served a multi-course meal prepared by what she casually referred to as our weekend chef, which I translated to a culinary student hired specifically for this dinner. Derek poured rare wines with practiced commentary about vintages and regions, while the conversation centered on vacation properties, investment opportunities, and the inadequacies of their country club's recent renovations. I was seated at the far end of the table, introduced as my mother who's staying with us for the holidays, without any of the usual details Catherine normally provided, no mention of my career as a teacher, my volunteer work, or even my name, unless directly asked. I was, for all practical purposes, stage dressing in her production, the elderly mother whose presence suggested family values and filial devotion. Craig Henderson, a florid-faced man with an expansive waistline and an even more expansive ego, barely acknowledged me until dessert, when the conversation turned to real estate. "Property's always a solid investment," he declared, accepting another generous pour of port from Derek. "Just closed on a little vacation home in Aspen. Nothing fancy, just a place to crash during ski season." "How lovely," I commented. "I've always found real estate to be quite rewarding myself." 5 heads turned toward me with varying expressions of surprise, as if the stage decoration had suddenly started reciting Shakespeare. "Mom owned a small home in Oak Ridge," Catherine explained quickly, emphasizing small as she shot me a warning glance. "Recently sold," I added pleasantly. "I'm considering where to invest the proceeds." Derek perked up immediately. "I've been telling Eleanor she should consult with our firm. At her age, safety is paramount." "At her age," I repeated silently, suppressing a smile. If only they knew that, at my age, I'd completed more successful property transactions than everyone at this table combined. "Smart move," Craig nodded sagely. Older investors often fall prey to scams. Better to work with established professionals. He turned to his wife. Remember my mother's neighbor? Got taken for everything in that timeshare scheme. How much did your house sell for, Eleanor? Belinda Henderson asked with the false sweetness of someone inquiring about a medical condition. Before I could respond with an appropriately vague answer, Catherine intervened. Mom got a very reasonable price, considering the outdated kitchen and the work the foundation needed. Another untruth. My house had been impeccably maintained and recently updated. Just enough to keep me comfortable in a nice retirement community, I said, noticing how both Catherine and Derek relaxed at my apparent cooperation with their narrative. After the Hendersons departed, Catherine cornered me in the kitchen as I helped clear dishes, despite her protests that I should rest. Mom, please don't discuss financial matters with our guests, she whispered urgently. Craig is Derek's boss, and it's important we present a certain image. And what image is that, dear? I asked mildly, rinsing a crystal champagne flute that I suspected they couldn't afford to break. Just successful, put together, you know. She took the glass from my hands. And maybe tomorrow we can go shopping. Get you some new outfits for the holiday parties. My treat. I raised an eyebrow. What's wrong with my clothes? Catherine sighed dramatically. Nothing's wrong. They're just a bit dated. I want you to feel included, not like someone's grandmother. I am someone's grandmother, I reminded her. You know what I mean, she huffed. I'm trying to help you. I acquiesced, partly from fatigue, and partly because I was beginning to formulate a plan. 3 weeks in this household would be revelatory, I suspected. And perhaps by the end of it, some important lessons would be learned. Though not necessarily by me. That night, climbing the steep stairs to my attic accommodation, I felt the first twinge of genuine anger. Not for myself. I could easily check into the Granville Hotel tomorrow if I wished. But for all the elderly parents who were treated as burdens rather than individuals with value beyond their usefulness. Parents who, unlike me, didn't have the financial means to walk away from disrespectful treatment. As I prepared for bed in the cramped attic bathroom with its flickering light and temperamental plumbing, I decided to observe first, act later. My daughter and her family were putting on an elaborate show. But for whom? And at what cost? The facade of success they'd constructed seemed so fragile, so desperate. It made me wonder what lurked behind it. Sleep came fitfully in the unfamiliar. Bed interrupted by the house's creaks and groans amplified in the attic space. Around midnight, voices drifted upward through the heating vent. Catherine and Derek arguing in hushed but intense tones. We can't keep doing this, Derek was saying. The credit cards are maxed out. That dinner alone cost. It was an investment, Catherine interrupted. Craig mentioned the executive position opening up. And Belinda loved my portfolio. We're drowning here, Kath. The second mortgage, the kids' tuition, your studio renovation. And now Christmas? Your mother's pension and whatever she got? For that house won't make a dent. My ears perked up at the mention of my finances. She doesn't need the money, Catherine said dismissively. What's she going to spend it on anyway? Better it helps her family. Once we get her settled in Peaceful Pines after the holidays, we'll suggest consolidating her assets for simplicity's sake. Peaceful Pines, the assisted living facility on the outskirts of town, known for its bare-bones approach and understaffed facilities. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. She's still sharp, though. Derek sounded doubtful. She'll see through a direct approach. That's why we need these 3 weeks. Catherine's voice had taken on a calculating tone I'd never heard before. We'll emphasize how difficult living alone is for her. The stairs to the attic will help make that point. By Christmas, she'll be convinced she can't manage on her own anymore. The heating vent carried Derek's reluctant agreement, followed by Catherine's reminder about focusing on the bigger picture and something about keeping her mother's outdated wardrobe visible during their holiday entertaining to reinforce the narrative of her limited means. I lay awake long after their voices faded, processing what I'd heard. The attic placement hadn't been due to a renovation or space limitations. It was strategic, part of a larger plan to convince me I was incapable of independent living. My own daughter was essentially setting me up to fail, to feel vulnerable and dependent, all to access what she assumed was my modest retirement fund. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so heartbreaking. Catherine was scheming to get her hands on my supposed teacher's pension and house proceeds, perhaps a few $100,000 at most, completely unaware that she was the potential heir to a $20 million fortune that I was becoming increasingly disinclined to leave her. Morning brought new perspective and a decision. Rather than confronting Catherine immediately or simply leaving, I would play along, at least for now. I wanted to understand how deep this deception ran, who else was involved, and whether there was anything redeemable in my daughter's character that might explain or excuse her behavior. Breakfast featured more of the same performance. Catherine fussed about whether the coffee was too strong for my sensitive stomach. I'd never had digestive issues in my life. And Derek loudly mentioned how difficult the attic stairs must be for me, offering to help me up and down them as if I were an invalid rather than a woman who still did yoga 3 times weekly. Actually, I find the stairs quite manageable, I said cheerfully, helping myself to another piece of toast. Quite invigorating, really. The look of dismay that flashed across Catherine's face confirmed my suspicions. My capability was inconvenient to their narrative. Well, don't overdo it, she cautioned. We wouldn't want any accidents. The day proceeded with Catherine's promised shopping excursion, an exercise in humiliation disguised as generosity. She selected clothing for me that was purposefully aging, shapeless cardigans, elastic-waisted pants, orthopedic-looking shoes. When I reached for a stylish blazer, she redirected me to a section she described as more age-appropriate. "This is what women your age wear, Mom," she insisted when I expressed a preference for something more fitted. "Trust me, I'm a designer. I know what looks good." I acquiesced, allowing her to purchase an entire wardrobe that made me look 20. Years older and considerably less affluent than I was. The price tags were modest, the quality poor, exactly the image Catherine wanted to project about her mother. That afternoon, while Catherine was occupied with a client call, I slipped into her home office under the pretense of borrowing reading material. What I found confirmed my worst fears. A brochure for Peaceful Pines prominently displayed on her desk, along with a partially completed application form with my name on it. Next to it lay a document titled Mother's Assets, with wildly inaccurate estimates of my worth and notes about management options. I photographed everything with my phone, then quietly returned to the attic to consider my next move. The reality of my daughter's betrayal settled like a weight on my chest. What had happened to the bright-eyed girl who once made me handmade Mother's Day cards? When had she transformed into someone who could coldly calculate the value of her mother's remaining years against her own financial ambitions? More importantly, what should I do now? I could walk away, check into the Granville as originally planned, and cut Catherine out of my will without another word. I had no legal obligation to explain myself or give her another chance. But something, perhaps lingering maternal hope, perhaps just curiosity, made me hesitate. "Mom, are you up here?" Catherine's voice called from the stairwell, interrupting my thoughts. "The Carlsons have invited us for drinks tonight. Their son just made partner at his law firm, and they're celebrating." "That sounds lovely, dear," I replied, quickly tucking away my phone. "Should I wear one of my new outfits?" Catherine's smile was genuine for once. "Yes? Perfect. The navy set with the matching scarf." The ensemble in question would have been appropriate for a resident of Peaceful Pines, which I supposed was the point. I was being dressed for the role Catherine had assigned me in her production, As I slowly and deliberately prepared for the evening, applying minimal makeup and styling my hair in the simple way Catherine preferred, more dignified for a woman your age, I made a decision. I would give my daughter one chance, one opportunity, to show me that somewhere beneath the materialistic, calculating facade beat the heart of someone I could still recognize as my child. But first, I needed more information, and for that, I would need allies. The Carlsons' gathering provided the perfect opportunity. While Catherine and Derek networked aggressively with the professional crowd, I settled myself among the older guests, many of whom were parents of Catherine's peers. With strategic questions and gentle prompting, I began piecing together what everyone in town apparently already knew. My daughter and son-in-law were in serious financial trouble. "Such a shame about that investment of Derek's," Mrs. Whitman murmured over her gin and tonic. "Half the country club got burned in that scheme." "And Catherine's business expansion was ill-timed," added Mr. Carlson, who I'd known since Catherine was in elementary school. "The luxury market is contracting. 4 designers in town have closed shop already." By the end of the evening, I'd learned that Derek had lost his and several clients' money in a high-risk venture that had collapsed spectacularly, leaving him professionally vulnerable and personally indebted. Catherine had taken out business loans to open a second design studio location, which now stood mostly empty, hemorrhaging money monthly. They were leveraged to the hilt, their home remortgaged, their credit exhausted. They were drowning, just as Derek had said during their late-night argument. And they saw my imagined nest egg as their life raft. It explained the desperation behind their scheme, but it didn't excuse it. Genuine need might have elicited my help freely given. Manipulation and deceit only hardened my resolve to teach them the lesson they so clearly needed. The next morning, I made a discreet call to my lawyer, Joseph Bennett, who had managed my affairs for decades. I outlined what I'd discovered and what I suspected was coming, then gave him specific instructions. Joseph, ever professional, expressed concern, but agreed to make the necessary arrangements. "Are you certain this is how you want to proceed, Eleanor?" he asked, before ending the call. "It seems rather severe." "Sometimes, Joseph, the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to let them experience the natural consequences of their actions," I replied. "Besides, I'm not closing doors permanently, just ensuring that whoever walks through them does so with honesty and respect." With my contingency plans in place, I devoted the next few days to playing the role Catherine had cast me in. The declining elderly mother who needed constant reminders about medication she wasn't taking, assistance with tasks she could easily manage herself, and simplified explanations of adult conversations as if her comprehension was failing alongside her physical abilities. It was exhausting and demeaning, but enlightening. The more helpless I appeared, the more solicitous Catherine became, helping me upstairs she'd deliberately assigned to me, speaking loudly though my hearing was perfect, cutting my food into unnecessarily small pieces at dinner, all while exchanging meaningful glances with Derek that clearly communicated, "See how she's failing? She clearly needs our help managing everything, including her finances." The grandchildren watched this performance with varying reactions. Amber, absorbed in her social media existence, barely registered the charade. Jacob, however, observed with increasing discomfort, often shooting me apologetic glances when his parents were particularly patronizing. One afternoon, finding me alone in the attic, Jacob lingered awkwardly at the doorway. "Grandma, do you actually need help with your phone settings, or was Mom just saying that?" I smiled at him, dropping the confused expression I'd adopted for Catherine's benefit. "What do you think, Jacob?" He hesitated, then stepped into the room, lowering his voice. "I think you're a lot sharper than they're treating you. And that you could probably teach me a few things about technology, considering you were texting before Mom even got her first smartphone." I laughed, genuinely delighted by his perception. Very observant. Would you like to know a secret? Jacob nodded eagerly, sitting beside me on the bed. Your grandmother is perfectly capable of managing stairs, technology, finances, and anything else life throws her way, I said quietly. I'm just curious to see how far your parents will take this little performance. His eyes widened. So you know what they're trying to do? Get me to sign over control of my assets by convincing me I'm incapable of managing independently? Yes, I'm aware. Jacob looked mortified. That's messed up. I heard them talking about Peaceful Pines. That place is depressing. We visited for a school community service project. The residents looked so sad. Indeed, I nodded. Not where I'd choose to spend my golden years. What are you going to do? He asked, a mix of concern and curiosity in his expression. I haven't decided entirely, I admitted. But I'd like you to keep our conversation between us for now. Can you do that? He nodded solemnly. They shouldn't treat you like this. It's not right. In that moment, looking at my grandson's earnest face, I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps the next generation had learned something the current one had missed. As Christmas approached, Catherine's campaign intensified. She began finding brochures for senior living facilities around the house, casually mentioning friends' parents who absolutely loved the structured environment and freedom from home maintenance. Derek initiated conversations about financial planning, offering to simplify my affairs by consolidating accounts under their management. Really, Mom, at your age you shouldn't have to worry about these complex decisions, Catherine insisted during dinner, a week before Christmas. Derek and I are happy to take that burden from you. That's very thoughtful, I replied mildly, though I've managed reasonably well these past 72 years. Catherine exchanged a look with Derek. Of course you have, but things get more complicated as we age. Remember how confused you were about your cable bill last month? A fabrication. I hadn't discussed any bills with her. And those attic stairs, Derek chimed in. I notice you wincing every time you climb them. Peaceful Pines has everything on one level, you know. I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. You know, this conversation reminds me of something my financial advisor mentioned recently. The reaction was immediate. Catherine's fork paused midway to her mouth. Financial advisor? You never mentioned having one. Didn't I? Joseph Bennett? He's handled my affairs for decades. Lovely man, very thorough. Derek cleared his throat. Is that really necessary? Financial advisors take quite a percentage, and with your limited income. Oh, he's worth every penny, I continued pleasantly. Especially with the recent changes in my portfolio. Portfolio? Catherine echoed weakly. I nodded, enjoying their confused expressions. Nothing extraordinary, just a few properties and investments I've accumulated over the years. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Catherine recovered first, her laugh brittle. Mom, you don't need to exaggerate to impress us. We know teachers' salaries, and Dad always handled the finances anyway. Did he? I smiled at the memory of Thomas, who had been enormously proud of my business acumen once he discovered it. How interesting that you think so. Before Catherine could respond, I excused myself, claiming fatigue after a long day, another role in the performance. As I climbed the attic stairs, deliberately slower than necessary, I heard urgent whispers behind me. That night, the heating vent again carried their conversation up to my attic room. She's bluffing, Catherine insisted. Mom doesn't have a portfolio. Dad left her the house and his pension, that's it. But what if she does? Derek sounded worried. This Bennett person, should we look into him? There's nothing to find. She's just being difficult because she senses we're concerned about her independence. Classic defensive behavior in seniors. Their conversation devolved into a strategy session for Christmas Day, when they planned to present me with Peaceful Pines brochures as a gift, along with thinly veiled suggestions about simplifying my finances for my protection. They would emphasize recent incidents of confusion or physical limitation, all invented as evidence of my decline. Christmas Eve arrived with a flurry of last-minute preparations. Catherine hosted an elaborate dinner for their social circle, featuring me in my deliberately dowdy new clothes, seated in a corner where guests could express appropriate concern about my frailty. I played my part perfectly, occasionally forgetting names or appearing confused about simple topics, watching Catherine's satisfied expression each time I reinforced her narrative. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Catherine approached me with uncharacteristic warmth, embracing me with what seemed like genuine affection. "Thank you for being such a good sport, Mom," she said softly. "I know the holidays can be overwhelming." For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed the daughter I remembered, the one capable of genuine connection. But then she continued, "Tomorrow will be so much easier, just family. And we have a wonderful surprise planned for you." The assisted living brochures, the financial intervention. My heart hardened again. "I have a surprise for you as well," I told her, patting her hand. "Something I've been planning for quite some time." Catherine's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "That's sweet, Mom. Looking forward to it." Christmas morning arrived bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the small attic window as I carefully dressed in the most matronly outfit Catherine had purchased. Today was the day all would be revealed, one way or another. Downstairs, the family gathered around an extravagantly decorated tree. Jacob caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. He'd kept our secret, sensing the reckoning that was coming. The gift exchange proceeded predictably. Expensive presents for the children, tasteful items exchanged between Catherine and Derek, and, for me, exactly as anticipated, a glossy folder tied with a red ribbon. "Our special gift to you, Mom," Catherine announced, her voice syrupy with false enthusiasm. "Peace of mind for your future." I accepted the folder with appropriate bewilderment, opening it to find exactly what I'd expected. Peaceful Pines brochures, an application form with my name already filled in, and a document title, Financial Simplification Plan, that essentially transferred control of my assets to Catherine and Derek. "I don't understand," I said, feigning confusion. Catherine knelt beside my chair, taking my hand in hers. "Mom, we've been worried about you. The confusion, the difficulty with stairs, managing your affairs. Peaceful Pines is a wonderful community where you'll have the support you need, and Derek and I will handle all the complicated financial matters so you won't have to worry about a thing." I looked from the brochure to my daughter's earnest expression, then around at the family. Derek nodded encouragingly. Amber looked bored. Only Jacob seemed troubled, shifting uncomfortably on the couch. "This is very thorough," I said carefully. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into my future." "We want what's best for you," Derek added smoothly. "After all, at your age, simplifying is key." I nodded slowly, then reached for my handbag, beside the chair. Before I respond to this thoughtful gift, I'd like to present mine. From my bag, I withdrew an envelope, simple, unadorned, and handed it to Catherine. "What's this?" she asked, the confidence in her voice wavering slightly. "Open it," I suggested. "It might help inform our discussion about my future." Catherine tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents, a single sheet of paper. As she read, her face drained of color. Derek, looking over her shoulder, inhaled sharply. "Is this some kind of joke?" Catherine whispered. "Not at all," I replied calmly. "That's a summary of my actual financial position, prepared by Joseph Bennett, the advisor you didn't believe existed." You'll note the properties listed on page 2 and the total valuation at the bottom. Catherine's hands trembled as she turned the page. $20 million, she read aloud, her voice barely audible. Give or take, depending on the market, I confirmed. The commercial properties in particular have appreciated significantly in recent years. Derek snatched the document, scanning it with disbelieving eyes. This can't be real. I assure you it is. I've been investing in real estate since before Catherine was born. Your father, I addressed my daughter directly, knew and respected my business acumen, even if you assumed he handled everything. The room fell silent, the only sound the gentle crackling of the fire in the hearth. Jacob's expression had transformed from concern to something approaching admiration, while Amber had finally looked up from her phone, sensing the dramatic shift in atmosphere. But you never said anything, Catherine finally managed. You live so modestly. I believe in living within my means, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil in the room. Wealth isn't about displaying it. It's about the freedom it provides. Freedom I've used to live exactly as I choose. Catherine stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, her carefully constructed perception of her helpless, financially dependent mother crumbling before her eyes. The brochures for Peaceful Pines lay forgotten on the floor where they had slipped from her hands. All this time, she whispered. The modest house, the budget shopping, the cautious spending. It was a choice? Of course it was, I said. My parents lived through the Depression. They taught me that true security comes not from what you display, but what you quietly build. I gestured around at their lavish home with its expensive furnishings. The appearance of wealth and actual wealth are rarely the same thing. Derek seemed unable to process what was happening, looking back and forth between the financial summary and me with increasing confusion. But you're a retired English teacher. How did you? I started small, I explained. My grandmother left me $30,000 when I was 25. Instead of spending it, I bought a rundown duplex near the university, renovated it myself on weekends, and rented to students. The income from that property funded the next purchase. And so on. For 50 years, Catherine's voice had taken on an accusatory tone. You've been secretly wealthy for 50 years while watching us struggle? I felt a flash of indignation. Struggle? With your 5-bedroom house and luxury cars? Your European vacations and private schools? Those weren't struggles, Catherine. Those were choices. Choices to live beyond your means while assuming I had nothing of value to offer except occasional handouts when you condescended to ask. Her face flushed. We've had genuine financial difficulties. Derek's investment was high risk and ill-advised, I finished for her. Just as your business expansion was poorly timed and overextended. I know all about it. This town talks, especially to those they don't see as threats or competition. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Jacob was watching the exchange, with unabashed interest, while Amber had finally put down her phone, eyes wide as she processed the revelation that her supposedly cash-strapped grandmother was actually a millionaire many times over. So what happens now? Derek finally asked, a calculating gleam already returning to his eyes as he mentally reassessed my value to their family. That depends entirely on you, I replied, reaching into my bag once more. There's something else in that envelope that Catherine hasn't yet acknowledged. My daughter hurriedly shuffled through the papers, pulling out a second document that had been overlooked in the shock of the first revelation. Her face, which had begun to regain some color, blanched again. A reservation confirmation, she read slowly, for the Granville Hotel, starting today. My original Christmas plan, I confirmed. A suite overlooking the park, dinner with friends, and no one treating me like I'm one memory lapse away from full cognitive decline. You're leaving? Now? On Christmas? The hurt in Catherine's voice might have swayed me once, but I'd witnessed too much calculation behind her concern to be moved by it now. I had planned to stay through New Year's, as you suggested, I said evenly. But that was before I discovered I was being manipulated into surrendering my autonomy and finances. Before I was relegated to an attic despite there being a perfectly functional guest suite on the second floor, which, incidentally, I checked and found not under renovation at all, but rather filled with storage boxes that could easily have been placed elsewhere. Catherine at least had the grace to look ashamed at this direct confrontation of her lie. Derek, ever practical, tried to salvage the situation. Eleanor, surely we can discuss this reasonably. Whatever miscommunication has occurred— There was no miscommunication, I interrupted firmly. There was a deliberate campaign to diminish me, to make me feel incapable and dependent, all to gain control of what you assumed were my modest assets. That isn't something we can simply discuss, away over Christmas dinner. I stood, smoothing down the ill-fitting cardigan Catherine had selected to age me. I've called a car. It should be arriving shortly. I'll be spending the remainder of the holidays at the Granville as originally planned. Mom, please, Catherine finally found her voice again. Don't leave like this. Not today. What will people think? I almost laughed at the irony. Her concern still centered on appearances rather than the ethical implications of what she'd attempted to do. I imagine people will think whatever you tell them. You've proven quite skilled at crafting narratives. Jacob stood abruptly. I'll help you with your bags, Grandma. His unexpected support brought the first genuine smile to my face since the confrontation began. Thank you, Jacob. That would be lovely. As we ascended the stairs to the attic together, leaving a stunned silence behind us, Jacob whispered, That was epic, Grandma. Absolutely epic. I chuckled softly. Perhaps a bit dramatic for Christmas morning, but necessary nonetheless. In the attic, as I packed my few belongings, Jacob perched on the edge of the bed, watching me thoughtfully. What will happen to them now? Mom and Dad, I mean. They're really in financial trouble, aren't they? His perception impressed me. At 14, he was already more attuned to reality than his parents seemed to be. Yes, they are. But that trouble is of their own making, not mine to solve. And the money? Your fortune? Will they still inherit it someday? I paused in my packing, considering his question carefully. That depends on what happens next. I'm not removing them from my will, today, if that's what you're asking. But I am reevaluating what it means to leave a meaningful legacy. Jacob nodded, seeming to understand the nuance of my position. For what it's worth, I think you're right to leave. What they did. It wasn't okay. His moral clarity touched me deeply. Thank you, Jacob. Your support means more than you know. By the time we descended the stairs with my suitcase, a sleek black car was pulling into the driveway. Catherine and Derek stood in the foyer, their expressions a complex mixture of shock, calculation, and nascent regret. Mom, don't do this. Catherine made one last plea. We can work through this misunderstanding. As a family. This wasn't a misunderstanding, I replied gently but firmly. It was a deliberate deception that revealed how you truly see me, not as a person worthy of respect, but as a resource to be managed and exploited. That will take more than a conversation to repair. I turned to my grandchildren. Amber, finally appreciating the gravity of the situation, stepped forward awkwardly for a hug. Sorry about everything, Grandma. Will we still see you? Of course, I assured her. My issue isn't with you or Jacob. You're welcome to visit me anytime. Derek cleared his throat uncomfortably. Eleanor, regarding the financial summary. Perhaps we could schedule a time to discuss potential opportunities. My firm specializes in— My portfolio is quite well managed, thank you. I cut him off politely, but definitively. Joseph has overseen it for decades with excellent results. The car horn sounded softly outside. The driver had arrived to collect my luggage. As he loaded my bags into the trunk, I turned for one final word with my daughter. "Catherine," I said softly, "I raised you to be better than this. Somewhere along the way, you began to value appearances over authenticity, possessions over principles. I hope someday you'll remember what truly matters." Her eyes filled with tears, whether from genuine remorse or the realization of what she might have lost financially. I couldn't be certain. "What do you want from us? To beg? To apologize? What will fix this?" I shook my head sadly. "I don't know yet, but performing contrition because of my bank balance rather than true understanding of the harm caused, that certainly won't help." With those parting words, I walked out of their house and into the waiting car, leaving behind the elaborate Christmas scene with all its expensive trappings and hollow emotions. As we pulled away, I glanced back once to see the four of them, standing in the doorway, a picture-perfect family portrait now fractured by the exposure of its foundation. The drive to the Granville Hotel was quiet, allowing me time to process the morning's events. Had I been too harsh? Too dramatic? Perhaps. But sometimes a clean break is necessary before healing can begin. Catherine and Derek had constructed an elaborate deception designed to strip me of my autonomy and assets. Such a betrayal couldn't be glossed over with festive forgiveness simply because of the date on the calendar. The hotel welcomed me warmly, the staff discreetly efficient as they escorted me to my suite. A beautiful corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the twinkling lights of the city park. After the cramped confines of the attic, the spacious accommodation felt like a physical manifestation of my reclaimed dignity. I unpacked my belongings, including several outfits I'd hidden at the bottom of my suitcase, clothes that actually reflected my taste rather than Catherine's artificially aging selections. Then I called Joseph, my attorney, to update him on the morning's events. "They didn't take it well, I gather," he commented after listening to my account. "About as expected," I replied. Initial shock, followed quickly by calculation about how to salvage financial advantage from the situation. "And now?" I sighed, gazing out at the winter scene below. "Now we wait. Either they'll reflect and recognize the fundamental problem with their behavior, or they'll simply adjust their tactics to account for my financial status." "You don't sound optimistic," Joseph observed. "I'm reserving judgment," I said. "People can surprise you, sometimes by sinking lower than you imagined possible, sometimes by finding depths of character you didn't know they possessed." After ending the call, I dressed for dinner, selecting an elegant midnight blue dress that I'd purchased months ago, one that reflected my actual taste rather than the dowdy image Catherine had tried to project. The hotel's restaurant was hosting a special Christmas dinner, and several of my friends from the book club had reservations as well. The maitre d' escorted me to a table where 3 other women awaited, all vibrant, independent seniors like myself, all with their own stories of family complications and holiday machinations. "Eleanor!" Margaret, a retired surgeon, greeted me warmly. "We didn't expect you today. Weren't you staying with Catherine through New Year's?" "Change of plans," I said simply, taking my seat. "It seems my daughter had a very specific role in mind for me this holiday, one I wasn't interested in playing." The knowing looks that passed between my friends spoke volumes. Each had navigated their own complex family dynamics with adult children, who sometimes forgot their parents were still fully realized human beings, with agency and dignity. "Let me guess," Diane, a former judge, said dryly. "Suddenly you're too frail to live independently, too confused to manage your own affairs, too sentimental to recognize when you're being manipulated?" I laughed despite myself. All of the above, with a side of attic accommodations despite a perfectly available guest suite. They expressed appropriate outrage on my behalf, but without the drama or excessive sympathy that would have made me uncomfortable. These women understood something fundamental that Catherine had forgotten. Respect wasn't contingent on someone's usefulness or financial value. It was an inherent right, regardless of age. Our dinner was delightful, excellent food, intelligent conversation, and genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with the performance-based hospitality I'd experienced at Catherine's home. By the time dessert arrived, I had almost managed to set aside the morning's confrontation and enjoy Christmas. Evening, then my phone buzzed with a text from Jacob. "Mom and Dad fighting nonstop since you left. Dad keeps saying they've lost millions and Mom's crying about being disinherited. Thought you should know." I sighed, showing the message to my friends, who responded with varying degrees of exasperation and sympathy. "The money," Margaret shook her head. "It's always about the money, isn't it? Not the betrayal of trust, not the deception, not the fundamental disrespect." "Give them time," advised Helen, our fourth dinner companion and a retired therapist. "Right now they're in shock. The financial implications are concrete and immediate to them, while the ethical breach requires more self-reflection than they're currently capable of." "I'm not holding my breath," I admitted. Catherine has always been materialistic, even as a child. I blamed myself. Perhaps our modest lifestyle made her yearn for more. But now I wonder if some people simply value things over relationships, regardless of their upbringing. "What will you do about your will?" Diane asked pragmatically. 20 million is a significant inheritance. It was the question I'd been wrestling with since discovering Catherine's scheme. "I'm not sure," I confessed. "I always intended to leave everything to Catherine and the grandchildren. Now I'm considering other options. Perhaps direct trusts for Jacob and Amber when they're older, charitable foundations, or even directing Joseph to evaluate their character and circumstances at the time of my passing before making determinations." "Conditional inheritances are tricky," Helen cautioned. "They can breed resentment rather than growth. As can unconditional wealth transferred to people who haven't developed the character to manage it wisely," I countered. "I built my fortune through discipline, integrity, and hard work. I'd like those values reflected in its disbursement." Our conversation shifted to other topics as the evening progressed, but the question lingered in my mind. What was my responsibility to Catherine now? To forgive unconditionally? To use my financial leverage to demand better behavior? To write her off entirely? None of these options sat entirely comfortably with me. By the time I returned to my suite that evening, my phone showed 6 missed calls from Catherine, 3 from Derek, and even 1 from Amber. I wasn't ready to speak with them yet, but I did send a brief text to Jacob to ensure he was all right. His response came quickly. "I'm fine. Mom and Dad aren't. They're already talking about repairing the relationship and showing you how much they value you. Just FYI." I smiled sadly at his perceptiveness. Of course they were. 20 million. Dollars was a powerful motivator for sudden displays of filial devotion. The following morning brought a lavish flower arrangement to my hotel suite with a card bearing Catherine's distinctive handwriting. "Mom, we are deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. Please allow us to make amends. Christmas dinner awaits, whenever. You're ready to come home. All our love, Catherine, Derek, and the kids." A misunderstanding. Still clinging to that fiction rather than acknowledging the deliberate nature of their deception. And home. As if the house where they'd relegated me to the attic while plotting to institutionalize me could ever be considered my home. The manipulation continued, just with adjusted tactics to account for my newly revealed financial status. I set the flowers aside and prepared for a day of actual enjoyment. A massage at the hotel spa, lunch with friends, and an afternoon concert. In the park. My phone continued to buzz with messages from Catherine and Derek, growing increasingly urgent as the day progressed and I maintained my silence. By evening, the tone had shifted from contrite to concerned. "Mom, we're worried about you. Please, respond so we know you're okay. Should we come to the hotel?" This transparent attempt to position themselves as the concerned family members looking after their elderly mother, rather than the would-be manipulators who had been exposed, only reinforced my decision to maintain distance. I did, however, respond to Jacob, who had texted a simple, "You okay, Grandma?" "I'm wonderful," I assured him. "Enjoying a proper holiday with friends. How are things there?" "Tense," he replied. "They're strategizing nonstop about how to fix things with you. Dad keeps making comments about securing the family's future when he thinks I'm not listening." His insight confirmed what I had suspected. Their concern was primarily financial, not relational. They weren't grieving the breach of trust, but the potential loss of anticipated wealth. The next few days established a pattern. Morning brought elaborate gifts to my hotel suite. Expensive jewelry, designer accessories, rare books from my favorite authors. Afternoon brought escalating messages expressing concern about my well-being and confusion about why I wouldn't respond. Evening typically featured at least one attempt by Catherine or Derek to convince the hotel staff they needed to check on me personally, which the Granville's excellent security team politely but firmly rebuffed. Through it all, I maintained my silence toward them while enjoying the genuine warmth and companionship of friends who valued me for myself, not my bank account. On New Year's Eve, however, the situation escalated beyond what I had anticipated. I returned from an early dinner to find Catherine, Derek, and both grandchildren waiting in the hotel lobby, dressed formally as if attending a celebration. "Mom!" Catherine rushed forward when she spotted me, arms outstretched for an embrace I deftly sidestepped. "We've been so worried. Why haven't you answered our calls?" Her voice carried throughout the elegant lobby, drawing curious glances. From other guests. A public confrontation. Exactly what I had hoped to avoid, and exactly what Catherine knew would put pressure on me to respond graciously. "I've been taking time to reflect," I said evenly, maintaining a neutral expression. "As I made clear on Christmas, I needed space." "Space is one thing," Derek interjected, his tone carefully calibrated to convey reasonable concern rather than the frustration I suspected he actually felt. "Complete silence for a week is another. The kids have been worried sick about their grandmother." Jacob caught my eye with a barely perceptible eye roll at this obvious manipulation. Amber, however, stepped forward with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "We miss you, Grandma," she said softly. "Christmas dinner wasn't the same without you." Her sincerity touched me. Unlike her parents, Amber's distress seemed genuine rather than calculated. I softened slightly, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "I've missed you too, sweetheart. Both of you," I added, including Jacob in my glance. "But that doesn't change what happened." Catherine seized the opening. "Mom, we've all had time to think. We realize now how our actions might have appeared to you. The attic room, the assisted living brochures, it was all coming from a place of genuine concern, but we see now that we approached it all wrong." "Appeared to me?" I repeated, catching the careful wording. Not an acknowledgement of what they had actually done, but of how I had perceived it. The distinction was telling. "We never meant to make you feel diminished," Derek added smoothly. "We only wanted what was best for you." I studied their faces, the practiced expressions of contrition that didn't quite reach their eyes, the calculated body language designed to project sincerity. Only the grandchildren showed genuine emotion, Amber's confusion and distress, Jacob's wary skepticism. "What was best for me?" I echoed thoughtfully. "And now that you know about my financial situation, has your assessment of what's best for me changed?" Catherine flinched slightly at the direct question. "That's not fair, Mom. We've been worried sick about you, regardless of money." "Have you?" I challenged gently. Because Jacob tells me your conversations have focused primarily on securing the family's future and fixing things with me. Euphemisms, I suspect, for ensuring your inheritance remains intact. Derek shot a betrayed look at Jacob, who met his gaze unflinchingly. Catherine's expression hardened momentarily before she forced it back to concerned contrition. "We're here because we love you," she insisted. "We've arranged a special New Year's Eve dinner at Le Cirque, your favorite restaurant. A private room, just family. A fresh start for the new year. Please, Mom." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost painful to witness. They'd selected an expensive, exclusive restaurant, one they knew I enjoyed but rarely indulged. Due to my habitual frugality, to demonstrate their newfound appreciation for my preferences now that they understood my financial capacity. "I already have plans with friends," I said, gesturing toward the hotel's ballroom where final preparations for the New Year's gala were underway. "Perhaps another time, when we've had a chance for more honest conversation." Catherine's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "More honest? Mom, we've been completely transparent about wanting to reconcile. What more do you want from us?" "Acknowledgement," I said simply. "Not of how things appeared to me, but of what you actually did and intended to do. Until you can be honest about that, any reconciliation would be built on sand." Derek stepped forward, abandoning pretense as his frustration broke through. "Eleanor, this has gone on long enough. You've made your point. We misjudged the situation. Now let's move forward as a family instead of dragging this out." His condescending tone, addressing me as if I were a child having a tantrum rather than an adult responding to a genuine betrayal, confirmed that nothing fundamental had changed. They still didn't see me as a person deserving of respect and honesty. They simply saw me as a wealthier target for manipulation than they had previously believed. "I think not," I said firmly. "Jacob, Amber, I would love to have lunch with you both tomorrow if you're interested. Just the three of us." Amber looked uncertainly at her parents, but Jacob immediately nodded. "Absolutely, Grandma. What time?" Catherine's face flushed with anger. "You're dividing the family now? Turning the children against us?" "I'm offering to spend time with my grandchildren without the pressure of a false reconciliation," I corrected her. "The division in this family began when you decided I was a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected." The hotel manager approached discreetly, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Wright? Your friends are asking for you in the ballroom." "Everything is fine, thank you. I was just saying goodbye to my family." I turned back to Catherine and Derek. "I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Until then, I ask that you respect my wishes for space." Catherine opened her mouth to protest, but Derek, ever pragmatic, placed a restraining hand on her arm. He recognized the futility of pushing further in such a public setting. "We understand," he said tightly. "Kids, let's go." Jacob hesitated. "Tomorrow at noon for lunch, Grandma?" "Perfect," I confirmed, ignoring Catherine's glare. "I'll meet you in the lobby." As they walked away, Catherine rigid with frustrated anger, Derek calculating their next move, Amber confused and upset, Jacob looking back with a small supportive smile, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and resolve. This wasn't how I had imagined spending the holidays or entering a new year. But sometimes preserving your dignity required difficult boundaries, even with those you loved. The hotel manager escorted me to the ballroom where my friends awaited, their warm welcome a balm after the tense confrontation. As midnight approached and champagne flowed, Margaret leaned close to ask, "Are you all right?" We saw the family drama unfolding in the lobby. I considered her question carefully. Was I all right? My relationship with my only child was fundamentally damaged. My comfortable illusions about my family had been shattered. The future I had envisioned, peaceful retirement surrounded by loving family, now seemed uncertain at best. And yet, there was also clarity. The fog of manipulation had lifted. allowing me to see the truth of my relationships without self-deception. There was freedom in that clarity, painful though it might be. "I'm finding my way," I answered honestly. "It's not the path I expected, but perhaps it's the one I need." As the clock struck midnight and celebrations erupted around us, I raised my glass in a private toast, not to the new year itself, but to the newfound integrity with which I intended to live it. No more allowing others to diminish me for their convenience. No more sacrificing my dignity for the appearance of family. Harmony. The fortune I'd built over decades had given me financial independence. Now it was time to ensure that independence extended to every aspect of my life, including the courage to demand truth and respect from those who claimed to love me, regardless of whether they were motivated by my bank account or genuine care. That, I realized, would be my true legacy. Not the millions that might one day pass to heirs, but the example of standing firmly for one's worth, even when doing so meant standing alone. The first week of January brought crisp, cold days and a sense of renewed purpose. I'd extended my stay at the Granville indefinitely, finding the elegant suite with its attentive service far more appealing than apartment hunting in the winter weather. My lunch with Jacob and Amber had been illuminating. Without their parents present, both children had revealed more of themselves than I'd seen in years. Amber, initially quiet and uncertain, had gradually opened up about her struggles at school and her frustration with her parents' constant pressure to maintain appearances. "They care more about how things look than how they actually are," she'd confided, unconsciously echoing my own assessment of Catherine and Derek. "Do you know they made me quit art club because it wasn't prestigious enough for college applications? But it was the only thing I really loved doing." Jacob, more directly perceptive, had been blunter in his assessment. "They're freaking out about money," he'd informed me between bites of his burger. "Dad's been making calls to his finance buddies every night, trying to get investment advice or job leads or something. And Mom's studio is practically empty. I went by there last week and there was dust on everything." Their insights had confirmed what I'd suspected. Catherine and Derek's financial situation was even more precarious than town gossip had suggested. Their desperate scheme to gain control of my assets hadn't been merely opportunistic. It had been born of genuine financial panic. This didn't excuse their behavior, but it did contextualize it. Now, sitting in Joseph Bennett's office as January rain tapped against the windows, I contemplated how this understanding should influence my next steps. "The revised will is ready for your review," Joseph said, sliding a document across his polished desk. "As requested, it establishes separate trusts for Jacob and Amber, accessible when they turn 30, with provisions for education expenses before that milestone. The charitable foundation will receive 40% of your estate, with the specific allocation to be determined by the board you've selected." I nodded, scanning the document with care. "And Catherine?" Joseph's expression remained neutral, but I detected a note of concern in his voice. "As instructed, she and Derek receive nothing directly. Their only connection to your estate would be their positions as paid administrators of the children's trusts until Jacob and Amber reach adulthood, positions that can be revoked by the Oversight Committee if there's evidence of mismanagement." It was a harsh arrangement, cutting my only child out of her inheritance entirely, while still involving her just enough to remind her of what she'd lost through her actions. Part of me recognized the punitive aspect of this decision and questioned whether it truly aligned with my values. Another part remained deeply hurt by the calculated deception she'd orchestrated, unwilling to reward such behavior with financial windfall. "It feels extreme," I admitted, setting the document down. But so was their attempt to declare me incompetent and seize control of my assets. Joseph leaned back in his chair, studying me with the frank assessment of someone who had known me for decades. "Eleanor, may I speak candidly?" "Please do." "In 40 years of practice, I've learned that wills often reveal more about a person's emotional state than their true wishes. This document was drafted during a period of justified anger and hurt. Before you sign it, I'd encourage you to consider whether it represents the legacy you truly want to leave. His gentle challenge gave me pause. Was I making decisions based on temporary emotions rather than enduring values? Catherine's behavior had been inexcusable, but she was still my daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone after Thomas died, the young woman whose college graduation had filled me with such pride. "What would you suggest?" I asked, genuinely, curious about his perspective. Joseph chose his words carefully. "Perhaps a middle path, one that acknowledges the breach of trust without permanently severing the possibility of reconciliation. A conditional approach rather than an absolute one." The wisdom in his suggestion resonated with me. Despite everything, I didn't want my legacy to be defined by punishment or retribution. I wanted it to reflect the values that had guided my life: prudence, integrity, and yes, compassion, even when it was difficult. Draft an alternative, I decided. Something that includes Catherine, but with significant conditions and oversight. I want to leave the door open for change without naively assuming it will happen. Joseph nodded approvingly. "I think that's wise." Speaking of change, have you given any thought to your living situation? The Granville is lovely, but hardly a permanent solution. The question was timely. I'd been postponing decisions about where to settle after selling my house in BT Oak Ridge, partly due to the holiday disruptions, and partly from a lingering uncertainty about what I truly wanted at this stage of life. "I'm considering options," I said. "Oak Ridge holds memories, but perhaps it's time for something new. I've been looking at properties in Palm Harbor, that seaside community about an hour south." "Beautiful area," Joseph commented, "and far enough from Westbrook to establish some healthy distance from recent events while still being accessible for visits with your grandchildren." The thought of distance from Catherine and Derek's manipulations was appealing, but I was reluctant to move too far from Jacob and Amber, especially now that I'd reconnected with them in a more authentic way. Our weekly lunches had become a bright spot for all of us, a space where they could speak freely without the pressure of their parents' expectations. As if sensing my thoughts, Joseph added, "You know, I have a client who's quietly selling a property in Palm Harbor, one of those historic homes along Magnolia Street, overlooking the marina. Completely renovated last year, but he's relocating for work. It hasn't hit the market yet." My interest was immediately piqued. Magnolia Street was one of the most charming areas in Palm Harbor, with its old oak trees and view of the water. I'd admired those homes for years whenever I'd visited the coastal town. "I'd like to see it," I decided. "Perhaps this weekend." "I'll arrange it," Joseph promised, making a note. "Now, regarding your investment portfolio, the commercial property in Westbrook, the one near the hospital that Catherine doesn't know about, has received another purchase offer, 20% above market value." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very property that Catherine drove past daily, a medical office building I'd purchased 30 years ago, had become one of my most valuable assets, and she had no idea it belonged to her supposedly cash-strapped mother. If the sale went through, it would add several million to my already substantial fortune. "Let's review the offer," I said, pushing aside thoughts of how Catherine would react if she knew. "If the terms are favorable, I'm inclined to accept. That area is becoming overdeveloped, and I've been wanting to diversify further into sustainable investments." We spent the next hour discussing financial matters, the potential property sale, adjustments to my investment portfolio, and charitable contributions for the coming year. Throughout the conversation, I found myself reflecting on the strange dichotomy of my life. To the world, including my own family, I had been a modestly comfortable retired teacher. Only in settings like this, with my trusted advisor, did my true financial identity emerge. That compartmentalization had served me well for decades, allowing me to move through life without the complications that visible wealth often brought. But Catherine's scheme had forced a reckoning with the consequences of my secrecy. Had I inadvertently contributed to her materialism by never showing her the reality of my success? Had my privacy about financial matters taught her to equate worth with outward appearances rather than substance? These questions lingered as I left Joseph's office and stepped into the January afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under winter sunlight. Instead of calling for a car, I decided to walk back to the Granville, using the time to clear my head and sort through my complex feelings about Catherine's betrayal and my response to it. I was halfway back to the hotel when a familiar voice called my name. Turning, I found myself face to face with Lisa Thornton, Catherine's closest friend since college and the wife of Derek's business partner. Her expression registered shock at my appearance, not because I looked unwell, but because I looked distinctly unlike the dowdy, aging mother Catherine had been presenting to her social circle. Instead of the matronly clothing my daughter had. Selected, I wore a stylish wool coat over a cashmere sweater and slim trousers, with leather boots that emphasized my still trim figure. My hair, freed from the severe style Catherine preferred, was shaped in a flattering silver bob that framed my face. I looked, in short, like a wealthy, confident woman in her 70s, not the frail, dependent creature Catherine had been describing to her friends. "Eleanor!" Lisa exclaimed, recovering quickly. "What a surprise! Catherine mentioned you'd left rather suddenly on Christmas. We've all been so concerned." Her probing tone told me everything I needed to know about the narrative. Catherine had been spinning. I'd likely been portrayed as confused, emotional, perhaps even showing signs of cognitive decline. Anything to explain away my departure without acknowledging their scheme. "How thoughtful of you all to worry," I replied pleasantly. "As you can see, I'm perfectly well. The Granville is lovely this time of year." Lisa's eyes widened slightly. "You're staying at the Granville? Still? That must be quite comfortable," I finished for her, knowing she'd been about to say expensive. I've always believed in treating oneself well when possible. Her gaze traveled over my obviously high-quality clothing, lingering on the subtle but unmistakable designer logo on my handbag. Confusion flickered across her face as she tried to reconcile the woman standing before her with Catherine's descriptions of her financially dependent mother. Catherine didn't mention. That is, we thought. She struggled to find a diplomatic way to express her confusion. "That I was destitute?" I suggested lightly. "Hardly. I've simply preferred to live modestly, a value that seems increasingly rare these days." Lisa flushed slightly at the implied criticism. She herself was known for flaunting wealth she and her husband barely maintained, a trait she shared with Catherine. "Well, I'm sure Catherine will be relieved to hear you're doing so well," she said, regaining her composure. She's been absolutely beside herself with worry. Derek, too. I smiled noncommittally. "Please do give them my regards if you speak to them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment to keep." Before she could respond, I continued on. My way, knowing that within the hour, Catherine would receive a detailed report of our encounter, complete with descriptions of my appearance and implications about my financial status. The carefully constructed narrative of poor, confused mother would be considerably harder to maintain after Lisa's first-hand account of our meeting. Sure enough, by the time I returned to my suite at the Granville, my phone showed 3 missed calls from Catherine. I ignored them, not yet ready for the conversation that would inevitably follow. Instead, I called Margaret to finalize our dinner plans for the evening. "You'll never believe who I ran into today," I told her after we'd arranged to meet at 7. Lisa Thornton, Catherine's friend and chief enabler. The look on her face when she realized I wasn't the dowdy, dependent mother Catherine's been describing was absolutely priceless. Margaret laughed appreciatively. "I can imagine. What did she say?" Very little of substance, but her expression spoke volumes. I give it less than a day before Catherine shows up here, demanding explanations about my deception. "And what will you tell her when she does?" Margaret asked, her tone turning serious. It was the question I'd been asking myself since Christmas. What did I want from Catherine now? An apology? Recognition of her wrongdoing? Or something deeper? A fundamental change in how she saw me and our relationship? "The truth," I said, finally. "That I never deceived her. I simply kept my financial affairs private, as was my right. And that her scheme revealed far more about her character than my bank account ever could about mine." After hanging up, I settled into the comfortable window seat overlooking the park, watching as twilight softened the winter landscape. My conversation with Lisa had accelerated the timeline for a confrontation with Catherine, but perhaps that was for the best. The limbo of estrangement without resolution couldn't continue indefinitely, especially if I was serious about moving forward with a new home in Palm Harbor. As predicted, Catherine arrived at the Granville the following morning. Having evidently decided that my ignoring her calls justified an in-person ambush, the hotel's discreet security system meant she couldn't proceed directly to my suite, however. Instead, the concierge called up to ask if I would receive Mrs. Catherine Lawson in the lobby. I took my time dressing, selecting an outfit that conveyed exactly the image I wanted Catherine to see. Not flashy or ostentatious, but undeniably elegant and expensive. I wasn't trying to flaunt wealth, but I was done downplaying my success to make others comfortable. When I descended to the lobby, I found Catherine pacing nervously near the grand fireplace, her expression a mixture of frustration and confusion. She'd clearly dressed carefully for this confrontation, wearing what I recognized as her client meeting outfit, a structured blazer over a silk blouse, with tailored pants and heels that probably cost more than a month's rent for most people. "Mom," she said as I approached, her voice carrying a forced brightness. "Finally! I've been trying to reach you for days." "I've been quite busy," I replied calmly. "Shall we have tea? The lounge is quite pleasant this time of day." Without waiting for her response, I led the way to the hotel's elegant tea lounge, where plush armchairs were arranged around small tables near windows overlooking the garden. A server appeared immediately to take our order, a small courtesy, extended to guests they recognized as valued residents. Catherine watched this interaction with calculating eyes, noting the deference with which the staff treated me. Once we were alone with our tea service, she leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "Mom, what is going on? Lisa said she saw you yesterday looking like, well, not like yourself. And you've been staying here at one of the most expensive hotels in town for weeks now. Where is this money coming from?" The question was so direct, so entitled in its assumption that she deserved an explanation of my finances, that I almost laughed. Instead, I stirred my tea thoughtfully before answering. "The money, Catherine, is coming from accounts and investments that have been mine for decades. Accounts that, had your scheme succeeded, would now be under your control, despite your having no legitimate claim to them." Her face flushed at the directness of my response. "That's not fair. We were concerned about your welfare. The attic room was the only space available." "Please," I interrupted, raising a hand to stop the flow of falsehoods. "Let's not continue with fictions we both know to be untrue. I checked the guest suite myself. It was being used for storage that could easily have been placed elsewhere. The attic placement was strategic, as was the campaign to convince me I was declining physically and mentally." Catherine's posture stiffened, her expression hardening. "You're twisting everything. And you still haven't explained how you suddenly have all this money? Have you been lying to us for years about your financial situation?" The accusation that I had been the deceptive one in our relationship was so audacious it momentarily took my breath away. When I responded, my voice was calm but firm. "I have never lied about my finances, Catherine. I simply chose not to disclose their full extent. There's a significant difference between privacy and deception, a distinction that seems to escape you. But all those years, she pressed, disbelief evident in her tone. When we were struggling with mortgage payments, when Jacob needed braces, when Amber's school tuition increased, you let us believe you couldn't help. You watched us stress over money while sitting on a fortune? The hypocrisy was staggering. This from a woman who drove a luxury SUV, maintained a country club membership, and renovated her kitchen annually, all while claiming financial hardship. Your definition of struggling has always been suspect, I observed. From what I've seen, your financial difficulties stem not from insufficient income, but from living beyond your means. I helped with genuine necessities, Jacob's education, emergency home repairs. I drew the line at subsidizing your lifestyle choices. Catherine's expression darkened. So this is punishment. You're angry about Christmas, about the assisted. Living brochures so you're flaunting your wealth to hurt us. No, Catherine, I said quietly. This isn't about punishment. It's about honesty, something that's been sorely lacking in our relationship. I'm not flaunting anything. I'm simply done pretending to be less than I am to accommodate your narrative. She fell silent, staring into her untouched teacup as if it might contain answers. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. How much? She asked simply. How much what? How much are you worth, really? I hesitated, weighing the wisdom of full disclosure against the potential consequences. Would knowing the exact figure change anything for the better, or would it simply intensify Catherine's sense of entitlement and resentment? Enough, I said finally. Enough that I never needed to worry about retirement. Enough that I could have helped with genuine needs had you approached me honestly instead of constructing an elaborate deception. Catherine's mouth tightened at my evasion. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're entitled to at present, I replied firmly. My net worth is private information that I share only with those I trust completely. Recent events have made it clear that you and Derek do not fall into that category. The pointed reminder of their breach of trust hit home. Catherine flinched slightly, her gaze dropping to her hands. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of something genuine in her expression. Not calculation or entitlement, but real hurt and confusion. I don't understand how we got here, she said softly. How everything went so wrong so quickly. It didn't happen quickly, I corrected her gently. This moment has been building for years. In your materialism, in your dismissal of my agency, in your increasing view of me as a resource rather than a person. The Christmas scheme was simply where it all became undeniable. Catherine looked up, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since her arrival. What happens now? With us, I mean. And with... She hesitated, clearly reluctant to directly mention inheritance, but unable to fully set aside the question. That depends, I said honestly, on whether you're capable of recognizing the fundamental problem with your behavior, on whether you want reconciliation because I'm your mother and you value our relationship, or because you've discovered I'm wealthy and you want access to that wealth. That's not fair, she protested, but with less conviction than before. Of course I value our relationship. You're my mother. Am I? I challenged quietly. Or am I just the retired teacher you relegated to the attic while plotting to declare me incompetent? Because those actions suggest a very different perspective than the one you're claiming now. Catherine fell silent again, conflict evident in her expression. Part of her clearly wanted to continue defending her actions, while another part was beginning to recognize the indefensibility of what she and Derek had done. I didn't see it that way, she said finally. I thought we were helping you, making decisions you wouldn't have to worry about. Without consulting me, without respecting my autonomy or preferences, that's not help, Catherine. That's control. She nodded slowly, a reluctant acknowledgement of the truth in my words. So what do you want from me now? An apology? Because I am sorry. Sorry it's come to this. Sorry you felt disrespected. I noted the careful phrasing. Sorry for the outcome. Sorry for my feelings. But not explicitly sorry for her actions. It was progress, but marginal at best. What I want, I said carefully, is for you to see me as I actually am. Not as a burden to be managed, not as a financial resource to be exploited, but as a complete human being with agency and dignity. I want a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than convenience or obligation. Catherine seemed to be processing my words, weighing them against her own perspective. After a long moment, she sighed deeply. I need time to think about all this, she admitted. It's a lot to take in. I nodded, accepting this as a reasonable response. Take the time you need. I'll be here, or possibly in Palm Harbor. I'm looking at properties there. Palm Harbor? Catherine's head snapped up in surprise. That's an hour away. It is, I agreed. A reasonable distance. Close enough for regular visits with Jacob and Amber, far enough for a fresh start. The implication was clear. I was establishing a boundary, creating physical distance to match the emotional space I needed. Catherine's expression suggested she understood the message, even if she didn't like it. Are Jacob and Amber still coming for lunch tomorrow? She asked, changing the subject. Yes, they are. Weekly lunches have become quite important to us all, I think. Catherine nodded absently, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. They've been different since Christmas, more withdrawn at home, less willing to simply go along with things, especially Jacob. I wasn't surprised. The events of Christmas had likely altered their perception, not only of me, but of their parents as well. Witnessing adult deception and manipulation was a painful form of growing up. They're at an age where they're forming their own views of the world and the people in it, I said neutrally, part of becoming adults themselves. Catherine gathered her purse and stood, signaling the end of our conversation. I should go. I have clients this afternoon. She hesitated, then added awkwardly, Thank you for seeing me. For talking instead of just cutting us off entirely. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement that I had legitimate reason to sever ties if I chose to. Another small step toward genuine understanding. I never wanted estrangement, I assured her. Only honesty and respect. She nodded once more, then turned to leave, her posture less rigid than when she'd arrived, but still carrying the tension of unresolved conflict. I watched her go, feeling neither triumph nor defeat. Only a quiet certainty that this conversation, difficult as it had been, was a necessary step toward whatever our relationship would become in the future. As I finished my tea alone in the ideal, elegant lounge, I reflected on the complex emotions the encounter had stirred. There was sadness for what had been lost, the uncomplicated trust between mother and daughter, the assumption of good intentions, the comfort of family without condition or calculation. But there was also a strange sense of liberation in having finally spoken plainly about dynamics that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Catherine now knew the truth about my financial status, but more importantly, she knew that I was aware of her scheme and unwilling to pretend it hadn't happened. Whether this knowledge would lead to genuine remorse and change, or simply to more sophisticated manipulation remained to be seen. Either way, I was prepared to move forward with eyes wide open, valuing myself too much to accept anything less than the respect I deserved, even from my only child. Tomorrow, I would view the property in Palm Harbor, perhaps taking the first step toward a new chapter in my life. One where I no longer felt compelled to hide my success or diminish myself to make others comfortable. One where the fortune I built over decades would be used according to my values, not surrendered to those who had demonstrated they couldn't be trusted with it. The future stretched before me, uncertain in its details but clear in its direction. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same quiet determination that had built my fortune in the first place. Not with bitterness or vengeance, but with the calm certainty that I deserved better than an attic room, and condescending concern from those who saw me as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of respect in my own right. The Magnolia Street property exceeded my expectations. Situated on a gentle slope overlooking Palm Harbor's marina, the 3-story Victorian home had been meticulously restored, blending historic charm with modern conveniences. As Joseph's contact, a distinguished real estate agent named Vivian led me through sun-drenched rooms with gleaming hardwood floors and soaring ceilings. I felt a growing certainty that I'd found my next home. The previous owners completed the renovation just last year, Vivian explained as we toured the gourmet kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. Everything has been updated: plumbing, electrical, HVAC, while preserving the architectural details that make these historic homes so special. I ran my hand along the custom cabinetry, admiring the craftsmanship. It's exquisite work. The 3rd floor has been converted into a self-contained guest suite, Vivian continued, leading me toward a graceful staircase. Perfect for visiting family or a live-in assistant, should you ever need one. I smiled at the irony. From being relegated to an attic to potentially owning a home with a luxury guest suite on its 3rd floor. I'm more interested in how it might accommodate grandchildren for weekend visits. The tour concluded on the wraparound porch, where comfortable seating faced the water. Sailboats bobbed gently in the marina below, and beyond them, the bay stretched toward the horizon, its surface glittering in the winter sunlight. The asking price is $3, $2 million, Vivian said, watching my reaction carefully. Given the location and quality of renovation, it's actually quite reasonable for the current market. I nodded, unsurprised by the figure. It's fair. I'd like to make an offer. Full asking price, contingent on inspection, with a 30-day close if possible. Within hours, my offer was accepted. Within weeks, I had moved in. The Palm Harbor house represented not just a new home, but a new chapter, one where I would live openly as the woman I truly was, without diminishing myself, to maintain others' comfortable illusions. For 2 months, I heard nothing from Catherine or Derek. Jacob texted occasionally with updates about school and his robotics competition, careful messages that revealed nothing about the home situation. Amber, more susceptible to her parents' influence, remained silent. I respected their space, sending birthday gifts and casual messages of support without pressing for visits or explanations. Then one rainy April afternoon, as I arranged freshly cut flowers from my garden in the front hall, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Catherine standing on my porch, soaked from the spring downpour, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and uncertainty. "Hello, Mother," she said formally, water dripping from her expensive raincoat. "May I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly, gesturing her into the foyer. Catherine's gaze traveled over the elegant entryway with its sweeping staircase and antique console table, taking in the unmistakable evidence of wealth tastefully displayed. "This is quite a step up from the house in Oak Ridge," she observed, removing her wet coat. Though I had to hear about it from Lisa Thornton of all people. Apparently, her cousin works in real estate in Palm Harbor and couldn't resist sharing the news about the mysterious wealthy widow who bought the Magnolia Street mansion for cash. "I wasn't hiding it," I replied calmly, hanging her coat on a nearby rack. "I simply didn't see the need to make a formal announcement." Catherine's eyes continued to assess her surroundings, lingering on a piece of original artwork in the hallway, a painting I'd purchased at a local gallery the previous week. $3 million, Lisa said, plus extensive furnishings and renovations. "The price is a matter of public record," I acknowledged, neither confirming nor denying the figure. "Would you like some tea? I was just about to make some." She followed me into the kitchen, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden beginning to bloom with spring flowers. Rain pattered against the glass, creating a soothing backdrop to our tense reunion. "You've been doing well, I see," Catherine said as I filled the kettle. The statement carried an edge of accusation, as if my comfort somehow constituted a betrayal. "I have," I agreed simply. "And you? The children? Derek?" Catherine's carefully maintained composure wavered slightly. "It's been challenging. Derek lost his job last month. The firm downsized, and he was among the first let go. My design business is barely hanging on. We've had to make some difficult decisions." The news didn't surprise me. Derek's visit to Joseph's office had suggested financial desperation, and the subsequent months had likely only intensified their difficulties. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely, preparing a tray with teacups and a plate of lemon cookies I'd baked that morning. "Job loss is always difficult, especially in the current economy." Catherine watched my efficient movements around the kitchen, her expression unreadable. When the tea was ready, I led her to the sunroom at the back of the house, where comfortable seating faced a view of the bay, moody and gray under the rainy sky. "This house," she said finally, after we'd settled with our tea. "It must have cost nearly everything you got from selling the Oak Ridge place. How will you manage ongoing expenses? It seems imprudent for someone your age." I nearly laughed at the irony, her continuing to question my financial judgment even while facing the consequences of her own poor decisions. Instead, I sipped my tea calmly before responding. "Catherine, I think it's time for complete honesty between us. The Oak Ridge house represented a tiny fraction of my assets. The cost of this property, while significant, doesn't impact my financial security in any meaningful way." She stared at me, skepticism evident in her expression. "That's impossible. Dad was a financial advisor, not a hedge fund manager. And you were a teacher. Where would this supposed fortune have come from?" "I've been investing in real estate since before you were born," I explained patiently. "Starting with a small inheritance from my grandmother, I gradually built a portfolio of properties across 3 states. Your father knew and supported my ventures, though we kept them separate from our regular finances." Catherine shook her head in disbelief. "All these years, you were secretly wealthy? While watching us struggle with mortgage payments and tuition costs? While living in that modest house and driving that ordinary car?" "I lived as I chose to live," I corrected gently. "Modestly, yes, but by preference rather than necessity. And I helped with genuine needs, Jacob's education, emergency home repairs. What I didn't do was subsidize lifestyle choices I considered unsustainable or unwise." A flash of anger crossed Catherine's face. "So you were judging us all along, watching us struggle while sitting on millions, feeling superior because we didn't share your frugal values." It was nearly identical to Derek's accusation in Joseph's office, suggesting they'd discussed this perspective extensively. The characterization of their financially irresponsible choices as merely different values, rather than objectively poor decisions, revealed how deeply they'd rationalized their behavior. "It wasn't about judgment," I said firmly. "It was about allowing you to live with the natural consequences of your choices. Would financing your country club membership or luxury car have actually helped you develop financial responsibility? Or would it have enabled continued poor decision-making?" Catherine fell silent, staring into her teacup as if it might contain answers. When she finally spoke again, her voice was subdued. "We've had to sell the house. We're moving to an apartment next month, something we can actually afford on my income alone while Derek looks for work." The admission clearly cost her pride, but it represented a significant step toward financial reality, perhaps the first in her adult life. "That sounds like a prudent decision," I said carefully, avoiding any hint of condescension. "Aligning expenses with actual income is always wise." "The kids are devastated," Catherine continued. "Especially Amber. She's having to change schools for senior year because we can't afford the private tuition anymore." All her friends, her activities, everything's changing. I felt a pang of sympathy for my granddaughter, caught in the fallout of her parents' financial irresponsibility. Change can be difficult at that age, but sometimes it leads to unexpected growth. How are you supporting her through the transition? Catherine looked surprised by the question, perhaps expecting immediate offers of financial intervention rather than emotional guidance. We're trying to help her see the positives. The public school has a good art program which she's interested in. That's something, I encouraged. What about Jacob? He's handling it better. Says the robotics team at the public school is actually stronger, and he's looking forward to having his own space, even if it's smaller. He's more like you than I realized. Practical, adaptable. The comparison seemed to surprise Catherine as much as it pleased me. She fell silent again, absently tracing the rim of her teacup with one finger. Why are you here, Catherine? I asked finally, gently direct. After months of silence, there must be a specific reason for this visit. She met my eyes directly for the first time since arriving. Derek told me about his meeting with you, about asking for money and you refusing. I declined to provide a large sum without addressing the underlying issues that created the need for it, I clarified. That's not quite the same as refusing. To help. Catherine nodded slowly. I was furious when he told me, both that he'd gone behind my back and that you'd said no. But then, watching our financial situation continue to deteriorate, having to explain to the kids why we were selling their childhood home, I started to understand what you meant about consequences. Her words surprised me. I'd expected continued resentment, perhaps another attempt at manipulating funds, not this tentative acknowledgement of the principle behind my decision. The thing is, she continued hesitantly, Jacob and Amber really miss you. Especially Jacob. He talks about your lunches all the time, the conversations you had. And with everything changing for them right now, the move, new schools, having their grandmother in their lives would be stabilizing. I've missed them too, I said truthfully. Very much. They're welcome here any time, for visits, weekends, holidays. This home has plenty of space for them. Catherine nodded again, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked windows. And what about us? Me and Derek? Where do we stand now? It was the question I'd been expecting since she arrived. The real purpose behind her visit. Not just reconnecting the children with their grandmother, but determining what, if anything, might be salvaged of our own relationship. That depends, I said honestly, on whether you're interested in building something authentic and respectful, or simply re-establishing access to perceived financial resources. Catherine flinched at the directness of my assessment, but didn't deny its validity. I don't know if I can separate those things completely, she admitted after a long pause. Yes, our financial situation is dire. Yes, knowing you have wealth makes it harder to accept our struggles without resentment. But also, you're my mother, the only parent I have left, and watching the kids miss you has made me realize how much I've missed you too. Her unexpected vulnerability touched me. For the first time since Christmas, I glimpsed the daughter. I remembered beneath the calculating, materialistic exterior she'd developed over the years. Here's what I propose, I said carefully. We start small. Sunday dinners here, perhaps, with you, Derek, and the children. No financial discussions, no pressure or expectations, just family spending time together, getting reacquainted on new terms. And in the meantime, the move, the kids' education, we're barely staying afloat. At least she was being honest about her continued financial concerns rather than pretending they didn't exist. Progress of a sort. I won't provide general funds for you and Derek to manage, I said firmly. That hasn't changed, but I am willing to establish education trusts for Jacob and Amber, managed by an independent trustee, to ensure their schooling continues uninterrupted if that's what they want. Catherine's expression reflected conflicting emotions: relief about the children's education, disappointment about the continued restriction on general funds, uncertainty about whether the compromise was acceptable. "And longer term?" she asked. Finally. "What about inheritance, the estate? Have you written us out completely?" I appreciated the direct question, even as I recognized the persistent focus on financial concerns. "I've revised my estate plans to reflect recent events," I acknowledged. "The details are private, but I can tell you this. My will includes provisions for you, Derek, Jacob, and Amber, along with significant charitable giving. The specific structures reflect both my love for family and my commitment to responsible stewardship." Catherine absorbed this information with visible relief, though clearly she wanted more specific details. To her credit, she didn't press further. "Sunday dinners," she said instead, returning to my earlier proposal. "That sounds nice. A fresh start, maybe." "A beginning," I agreed. "With time and demonstrated change, other possibilities might emerge. But they can't be forced or manipulated. They have to develop naturally, based on genuine relationship rather than financial considerations." She nodded slowly. "I understand. Really, I do. It's just hard to separate everything that's happening at once." "Life often works that way," I said gently. "Challenges and opportunities intertwined, forcing us to examine what truly matters." After Catherine left, I stood on the porch watching her drive away through the rain, contemplating the conversation and its implications. Her visit represented a first tentative step toward reconciliation, motivated partly by genuine need for family connection and partly by continued financial desperation. The mixture was imperfect, but honest, a starting point at least, for whatever might develop in the future. That evening, I called Joseph to update him on Catherine's visit and to initiate the education trusts for Jacob and Amber. As we discussed the details, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment, from the attic room at Christmas to my own beautiful home overlooking the bay. From manipulation and deception to the possibility, however fragile, of a more authentic relationship with my daughter. 6 months later, sitting on my porch as autumn painted the trees in gold and crimson, I opened my journal and began to write. The Sunday dinners had become a tradition, evolving from awkward, stilted affairs into something resembling genuine family gatherings. Not perfect, not entirely free of underlying tensions, but real in a way our interactions hadn't been for years. The education trusts for Jacob and Amber had provided stability during their transition to new schools. Amber had surprised everyone by thriving in the public school's art program, discovering a passion and talent that might have remained dormant in her previous, more restrictive environment. Jacob had indeed found a strong robotics team, and his weekend visits to my home had become frequent as he worked on projects in the studio I'd set up for him in the guest suite. Catherine and Derek, meanwhile, had been forced to confront financial reality perhaps for the first time in their adult lives. The apartment was modest but comfortable, located in a nice neighborhood with good public transportation that eliminated the need for 2 cars. Derek had eventually found a new position, less prestigious than his previous role, but with a steady income and more reasonable hours. Catherine's design business had undergone a necessary transformation, shifting focus from high-end luxury clients to more practical, budget-conscious projects for everyday homeowners. The transition hadn't been smooth. There had been arguments, resentments, backsliding into old patterns of entitlement and manipulation, but each setback had become an opportunity for growth, each confrontation a chance to establish healthier boundaries and expectations. I looked out at the bay, where sailboats caught the late afternoon light, and considered what I'd learned through this unexpected chapter of my life. The Christmas betrayal, painful as it had been, had forced a long overdue reckoning with patterns that had been developing for years. My complicity in those patterns, through silence, through accommodation, through reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths, had contributed to their persistence. The journey from that attic room to this porch had been about more than just exposing my financial status or asserting my independence. It had been about reclaiming my voice, my boundaries, my right to be seen and respected as a complete human being rather than a resource to be managed or exploited. The $20 million fortune that had been the focus of so much drama now felt almost incidental to the true wealth I'd gained: the freedom to live authentically, to speak honestly, to expect and demand the respect I deserved. That freedom had transformed not just my relationship with Catherine and her family, but my entire approach to life in my 70s. I'd joined the Palm Harbor Arts Council, where my financial expertise proved valuable in grant management and fiscal planning. I'd established a scholarship fund at the local community college, providing opportunities for non-traditional students pursuing second careers. I'd even begun mentoring young women interested in real estate investment, sharing the knowledge and strategies that had built my own portfolio over decades. These activities brought a richness to my days that went far beyond material wealth. They connected me to community, to purpose, to the meaningful contribution I still had to offer the world, even as I embraced this chapter of my life. As for Catherine and Derek, their journey toward financial responsibility and authentic relationship continued, with progress and setbacks in equal measure. Some Sundays were warm and genuine. Others revealed the lingering effects of entrenched patterns and values. But we were talking, really talking, about difficult subjects that had previously been shrouded in silence and assumption. The revised estate plan remained in place, with its conditions and oversight mechanisms designed to encourage growth while acknowledging reality. Whether Catherine and Derek would eventually demonstrate the transformation necessary to access more substantial provisions remained to be seen. But the structures Joseph and I had created ensured that regardless of their choices, Jacob and Amber would be supported in building their own futures based on their values and aspirations, rather than their parents' materialistic priorities. Perhaps the most profound change had been in my own relationship with money. For decades, I had maintained a strange dichotomy, building wealth quietly while presenting a deliberately modest public image. That compartmentalization had served its purpose in an era when women's financial acumen was often underestimated or resented, but it had also created its own complications. Now, in my Palm Harbor home with its tasteful but undeniable elegance, I had integrated those aspects of myself, neither flashy nor falsely humble, neither defined by my wealth nor diminished by hiding it. I had found a way to simply be, honestly, authentically, unapologetically myself. As twilight softened the sky over the bay, I closed my journal and reflected on the ancient wisdom that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what possesses us. For too long, secrets had possessed me: the secret of my financial success, the secret of my resentment toward Catherine's materialistic values, the secret of my hurt at being taken for granted. Bringing those secrets into the light had been painful but ultimately liberating, allowing authentic connections to replace performative roles. When the doorbell rang announcing the arrival of Catherine, Derek, and the grandchildren for our weekly dinner, I welcomed them with genuine warmth. The evening ahead would likely include both moments of connection and flashes of old tensions, both progress and regression, both hope and realistic caution. Such was the nature of family healing, not a smooth, uninterrupted journey, but a series of small steps forward, occasional steps back, and countless opportunities to choose love over resentment, authenticity over performance, dignity over accommodation. As we gathered around the table on the porch overlooking the marina, I studied their faces: Catherine's cautious hope, Derek's lingering resentment, Jacob's open delight, Amber's shy curiosity. The future of our family remained uncertain, the wounds of betrayal not fully healed. But we were here, together, taking the first small steps toward something new. And that, I decided as I raised my glass in a toast to new beginnings, was enough for today. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities. I would face them as I had faced everything else in my 72 years, with clear eyes, firm boundaries, and the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.